And hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at logging in nim. So generally, it is fine to just use echo and echo out, hello world, or whatever logs you may want to do. The only issue with this is you don't have things like leveling. For example, is this an information level? Is it a debug level? Is it an error level log? We need to know. It also doesn't come with any nice features such as automatically writing to a file instead of console logging to the console, and tiny things like that. And that is where the library import std/logging comes into play. Logging allows us to take logging to the next level. So first we need to define a logger, and this logger will be new console logger. Alternatively, you could use file logger instead of console logger to log to a file, but we'll get to that later. Now that we have a logger, whenever we want to log, we simply go logger.log. We specify the log level. So this would be what type of danger level is it? Whereas something like LVL info would be, okay, it's a level 1. It's something you might want to know. It's not really that important. And now we can say now connecting to YouTube. So if we're making let's say a YouTube video downloader, then this could be a info log that says, hey, we are just simply connecting to YouTube. And then of course, if we run this, it defines what level the log is, and then afterwards it prints out what the log itself is. Info level logs is useful when you want to provide context for the application. So in case that an error occurs, having info logs to say what happened before that error occurred may help. Now you do get more levels here, for example, LVL error, and this is of course if an error happened, not necessarily if the program stopped running, but just if an error happened in the program. You have LVL fatal, which is probably the worst case scenario, is where an error so bad happened it pretty much stopped the program from running. It's a fatal error. You have LVL warn, which is a little bit less harsh. So if it's not necessarily an error, but it's something you should know about. For example, someone's using a flag that will be deprecated. Then you give them a warning label and say, hey, you just used a flag that say --hint, which is not really allowed. If we take a look at nim actually, and we compile this with and show the hints, you'll notice here we get hints. This could be things like info level logging here because it provides you with extra information. And then finally, you also have LVL debug. This is usually just a flag you'd see if you're a developer. You don't really want to show debug logs to the user because upon release, debug logs generally don't get shown. And the reason is, usually when you do debugging, if you go if not defined, as we'll check if release is defined. Now release here pretty much says whether or not this is a release build of the application. So we are debugging production applications should not see this message. So in case that this is a debug build of the program, so not an official release build, we should be able to see this. We can confirm that because if we run this, we get a debug, we are debugging. However, if we do this, but then we add a release flag here, so -d:\release, then we don't get it. Even though the application is running, if I go here and say echo hello world, we can confirm that the application is in fact running, but it's not showing this debug level log because we're checking if it's been released. Now that we have the basics out of the way, let's define our file logger. So this one will specifically look at logging to files. There will be new file logger, and it will save it to errors.log. So a new file will be generated here called errors.log. And then the level threshold will be equal to LVL error. This level threshold will define what actually gets written to the file logger. Because we don't always want to log everything to a file, because that will just clutter up the file with information we may not need. This includes info and debug level file logging. But things like an error and a fatal error would be logged because we are specifically looking for that in the errors.log file. To test this out, we can go file logger.log LVL info. So this is an info level log. Let's just say now connecting to YouTube. And let's add a couple more here. Here we go. So we have an info level log, a debug level log, an error level log, and a fatal error level log. Now when we run this program, that doesn't need to be in release mode, but that's fine. If we take a look at our files, we have an errors.log file now. If we take a look inside that, we see error and fatal, but we do not see info and debug because our level threshold is only from error and above. So they will not show here. And of course, you can use common sense to know what level a threshold is. For example, a fatal error would of course be worse than an error because a fatal error would stop the program, where an error would just say, hey, something's wrong. That's where this level threshold goes. That also means that warn would not be displayed here. So if we just duplicate that debug there and say LVL warn, because by common sense, we can know that a warning is not nearly as bad as an actual error. So if we run this, we take a look at our logs, note they added new ones to the bottom or to the top, and there is no warning here. Now, you might already be thinking, okay, this is great and all, but it's kind of cumbersome to write any of this, because that's a lot of typing just for a log when I could just use echo. And you are right. That is why we have add handler. This adds handlers to logs to make them feel less cumbersome. For example, logger. And we can also add another one, add handler file logger. Now, both of these will be triggered at the same time, so take note of that. Both of these handlers will be triggered when we make a log. So if you don't want logs to display in the console, just don't add the top logger. If you don't want logs to be saved to a file, don't display that logger. As simple as that. So by adding both of them will be triggered once we call for a log. And to call for a log, we can either go log and specify the level, so LVL error, and specify some error. Now, of course, if we were to run this, and let's just remove that release mode there, we get error, some error, but it will also display it in errors.log right there. However, you can also now use keywords such as error, another error, or info, nothing of interest, or debug, developer note. Now, if we run this, all three of them does get displayed here, and in the errors.log, only the ones that are valid, defined by the level threshold, will be shown in the errors log. But there it is, another error. So take note, if you remove this threshold here, and you run this program again, then all of them will be displayed here. So take note that this handler still complies with any arguments that you pass into the original logger. You could also remove handler and then pass in, let's say, logger, and that will no longer log to the system. It will only log to the file. So if I put a fatal here, only in file, and run this, we will not get that fatal log, but it will appear inside of our errors.log. Now this new console logger, as well as the file logger, can both be updated to contain formats. So if empty string, and this will format it for us in a way that we can use. For example, let's say we want to specify the time it happened, because that could be very important, as well as specify the error level, or the log level rather, and in colon space, and after that it will automatically add the log that has been provided. I'm just going to expand this a little bit. Now if we run this, you'll notice we get a timestamp, so it's currently 8:05:40, the level, and then the log itself. And again, if you wanted to, you could pass this format string into this file logger as well, because currently it does not contain it. But you could pass it in there as well. Now if you run it, the files will also contain these extra information. Now there's a couple things you can do here. Instead of just time and level name, you do have options such as date. Just take note of the dollar symbol. You always need to add a dollar here to escape it. So there's dollar date, date time if you want the date and the time, app. So let's actually use them. So let's go here and say date, and here we can say app, and then let's go app name, app directory, the level ID, which is the first letter of the log level. So you might actually, let's put that there at the top, and then there we go. Now if you were to run this, we'll get a lot more information when we take a look at our logs. So first here we get our error level, and there's a fatal error. We get our date. Here we get the file. So if we go take a look here, that is the app. Then colon, and then we get the app name itself, which is just main. That's right there, main. And we can confirm this is correct because if I go pwd, there we go, home netsu documents tuts nem. Home netsu documents tuts nem, and then there's main. And in here we have the app there. And if we take a look there, there's the app there, which is pretty much the same as the app, but just excluding the app name itself. However, if you don't really know how your log should look, it is perfectly fine to also use verbose fmt string. This is one that's already built into nim that will help us with this. So let's just make this lvl info so we get more information in the logs. Now if we run this, it will automatically format this for us. So if we go to errors.log, you'll see here we get I, comma, the date and time, the name of the executable, and then what's what. So this is automatically something you can use if you don't want to write this out yourself. Verbose fmt string. For more information about where this is actually being logged to, and I'm just going to comment this out right now so we don't get too much information. You can use echo default file name, and that will give you where logs will be written to. And the reason we get main.log here is because that's the default file name. So if we were to just remove that, it will save it to main.log instead of errors.log, as you can see there. So if you did not specify a name here, then this will provide us with the default name. You can also get the log filter, and this will get the level at which logs will be logged at. In this case, just LVL all, meaning all the logs we put here will be logged. Whether it is info, whether it's warning, error, it will be logged. Of course, we change it by setting this threshold right there. However, we can change this default one as well by going set log filter level LVL. Of course, you did not need to specify level. You could have just gone LVL debug. That would have been fine as well. But now if we run this, we get LVL debug. Or if you use level to specify the level, then you'll get the same output. Now, it will only display logs that are at that level. But let's go error just so we can see it in action. So now if we were to uncomment this, we were to run this, and my bad, I did not focus there. Let's try again. You'll notice we only received the error here and not the info or debug. And this fatal here only happens in the file itself. So we won't see that. So by doing this, you can set them all pretty much to be error level or higher. And then finally, now we run into possibly a new issue. You don't always want to just add more and more logs to your logging file. You might want to cap each logging file to only have about 200 lines of logs in it before you might want to create a new logging file and move the old one as an old logging file. Nim has a built-in way to do this by just going new rolling file logger. So if we were to just remove all of the other things we do not use and we clean this up, then let's put this inside of a rolling, and we can set the max lines each file is allowed to contain to 5. Now, if we were to just update this, then here we go. So now we have 7 logs, but each file is only allowed to contain up to 5 logs. So it will create 2 files for us, one with 5 logs in it, and then another one with only 2 logs in it. So when we run the program, we get rolling log and rolling log.1. log1 is the oldest one at the moment, so here we have 5, and then rolling.log will contain the last 2. This way you can keep your log files small, and then later on check if you have maybe too many, and then just remove the ones that you don't want. And that's the basics of logging in nim. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next nim tutorial.